July 22nd, 2011. What started off as a normal summer day in Norway soon became one of the darkest moments in the country's history. A nation known for peace and safety would have two devastating attacks that would take the lives of 77 people, most of them being teenagers. This case involves extreme ideology, deception, years of planning and the murder of children. This is the case of Anders Breivik and the day Norway changed forever. As I say in all of my videos, this case will be talked about with respect for all of the victims, their families and everyone else impacted by this case. To understand the events of July 22nd, a lot of people have tried to answer a really difficult question. How could someone carry out an attack on that scale? Anders Breivik was born in Oslo in Norway in February 1979, and at first glance his childhood seemed fairly normal. There was always photos of him and his mum looking really happy and smiling together, but his parents split when he was quite young, and it was reported that his mum really hated men, and there would be some days that she would act like she loved her son so much, and then other days she really hated him. And most toddlers, they would play with toys and they'd be really messy, but not Anders. He showed signs of anxiety very early on. When he was done playing, he would try and tidy up the best he could just so he wouldn't need to feel the wrath of his mother. And reportedly his dad did try to get custody of him but failed. Anders was placed into a foster care home, and when his mum dropped him off there, she turned to the man of the foster care family and asked him if Anders could touch his private parts because he had only ever seen and touched a woman's, which suggests that he had maybe been getting abused off his mum, but that is all allegedly. As Anders grew older, he was described as quite socially withdrawn. He struggled to maintain friendships and he really isolated himself. During his teenage years, he focused on his appearance, his status, and mainly just trying to fit in. But while difficult childhoods and loneliness is sadly quite common, very few people go on to commit such horrific acts. So what changed? Over time, Anders started getting consumed by extremist beliefs. He spent long periods of time online engaging with political forums and material that reinforced anti-immigration and far-right views. This anger and resentment that he had slowly became something much darker, and he stopped thinking about violence completely. He started planning it. What makes this case so much more disturbing is how carefully planned everything was. Authorities later discovered that Anders had spent years preparing and planning for this attack. He had become deeply involved in extremist online communities, forums and chat spaces where his beliefs just got even more stronger. He also got really involved with gaming. While gaming itself doesn't create a violent extremist, investigators later looked at how isolated he really had become and how much his life revolved around online worlds and his extremist ideas. At the same time he was preparing in real life, he wrote an enormous manifesto that stretched over 1,000 pages long, outlining extremist beliefs and attempting to justify violence. One of the biggest elements in this planning was deception. He acquired clothing and equipment to make him out like a police officer. He carefully planned an image of authority, knowing that people are more likely to trust someone that they think is going to help them. And all these years of planning slowly built towards one date, July 22nd, 2011. On the afternoon of July 22nd, Anders Breivik arrived in central Oslo driving a white van at around 3:25 p.m. and parked it outside of a government building. A huge explosion ripped through Norway's government district, causing severe destruction and damaging government offices. This sent panic through the streets of Norway and emergency services rushed to the scene. At first, many people thought Norway was the victim of international terrorism. Nobody knew what had really happened, and a country known for such peace and having a really low crime rate, the explosion felt unimaginable. Police focused on the centre of Oslo as they thought that was the main crisis, but Anders Breivik had already started moving on to the next stage of his plan. Around an hour out of Oslo there is a small island called Utøya, and every summer they host a summer youth camp, and it's where teenagers and young people go to talk about politics, make new friends, swim and just have a really good summer. For many people it is filled with excitement and opportunity, and earlier that day the news of the Oslo bombing had spread to the island. Everyone was quite scared and felt uncertain, but word spread that a police officer had arrived. Anders Breivik had travelled over to the island of Utøya and claimed that he was a police officer there to help with security, as he had bought all this clothing to make him look like a police officer, and because the country was already so confused about this bombing, they believed him and ferried him over to the island. Once he got onto the island, everyone surrounded him as they thought it was a police officer and they felt safe, and he was reassuring them that they would all be safe. But what happened next was something nobody could ever imagine. What followed would be one of the deadliest mass casualty events in modern European history. At first, many people didn't understand what was going on. Some people thought it was fireworks or drills, but quickly panic would set in. Teenagers would be running through forests, trying to hide behind rocks, squeezing into bathrooms, and others would go in buildings, laying silently for long periods of time. A lot of other people would jump into the freezing cold water that surrounded the island, hoping that distance would help them. Some people were messaging family and friends, others simply messaged their loved ones saying goodbye. At first, emergency responders struggled to get to the island quickly, and the victims were unsure if help was actually going to arrive, and they said that every minute felt endless. Some people went in groups trying to comfort each other. A lot of other people hid alone, and on the island of Utøya 69 people died, and also combining the Oslo bombing, 77 people died in total that day. Eventually police reached Utøya Island and Anders gave himself up without any resistance, and for the people watching across the world, the fact that he was arrested alive sparked outrage and disbelief, as many people struggled to understand how someone could do all that and then just simply give themselves up. Anders was arrested and he was questioned, and this is where authorities found the manifesto, the extremist ideology and the years of preparation. Anders would be placed in Norway's prison system and he would remain there while awaiting trial. The trial quickly became one of the most watched in Norway's history. Anders admitted responsibility for the two attacks but tried to justify them politically. During his court appearances he would make extremist gestures linked to far-right ideology, such as Nazi salutes. One of the biggest legal questions was if he was criminally insane or fit to stand trial, but in the end the court ruled that out and said that he was legally responsible for his actions and was found guilty of terrorism and mass murder. But what shocked the rest of the world was his sentence. Anders Breivik would receive the longest possible sentence that Norwegian law would allow at that time, which was 21 years under a system called forvaring. I don't know if I'm saying that right, so I'll write it up on the screen, but forvaring is a preventive detention system, which 21 years doesn't sound like a lot, definitely doesn't sound like a lot compared to other countries, but there is an important difference. At the end of that prisoner's sentence, authorities will assess that prisoner to see if they are still deemed dangerous to society, and if they are, their sentence will get extended. So it is very unlikely that Anders Breivik will ever get out of prison. His prison conditions also sparked an international debate. Norway's prison system really focuses on rehabilitation, so their prison looks really comfortable. Prisoners will get their own bedroom, their own private bathroom, their own private gym. They are allowed to have pets, and they have a computer without internet. But critics argue that this is too comfortable for people that have commit such horrific acts. But supporters of the Norway's prison system argue that prison is for people's freedom to be taken, not basic human dignity. But the attacks of July 22nd, 2011 left a permanent scar on Norway. 77 people lost their lives, with most of them being young people with futures still ahead of them. I'm Crema Macy, and I hope to see you in the next video.